Good day, everybody. Today, I am here to present a lecture on the liberal welfare state, which seems to be in vogue and which is in vogue these days all over the world. Liberal welfare state is a state which cares for its people, which is the need of the hour. And in this lecture, we are going to discuss the role of the welfare state, the functions of the welfare state, the meaning of the welfare state, the limitations of a welfare state, and also what are the basic requirements for a state to be called a liberal welfare state. Liberal welfare state is not a new conception. It's not a new idea. Liberal welfare state is not a new phenomena. It is not a new concept. It has been there for ages. From Plato, who said it is the perfect form, to Aristotle, who said it is the ultimate home of man, to Hegel, who said it is the march of God on earth, to Machiavelli, who gave ultimate authority, the whole authority to the state, to the utilitarians, who said the greatest happiness of the greatest number. A liberal welfare state has always been in demand. Each thinker, each philosopher, changing the concept a little bit according to the times he or she was living, breathing, and trying to give suggestions how that liberal welfare state could be achieved or how it could function better. Now, the liberal welfare state talks about giving equality to people. It talks about giving freedom to the people. It talks about looking after its citizens socially, economically, and politically. Liberal welfare state talks about rule of law. It talks about equality. It talks about freedom and extending those freedoms to each and every citizen, irrespective of class, religion, region, class, caste, etc. Liberal welfare state is a lethal combination of democracy and capitalism. It talks about development in ways which people might criticize, people might say is wrong, but it talks about democracy and capitalism moving together, trying to mitigate the gap between the rich and the poor, avoiding concentration of wealth in a few hands, and seeing to it that the minorities or the weaker sex, that is the woman, or in case of India, the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes get their due. It talks about the well-being of each and every citizen. It talks about looking after the special children, the physically handicapped, children or people with special needs. The category can be anybody. But the liberal welfare state says, work, you will be rewarded, because that is what capitalism is all about. It also talks about democracy, which says a government of the people, for the people and by the people, a government which will look after its people, irrespective whether it has money in its coffers or it does not have money in its coffers. It will try to give whatever little it has to the people instead of keeping it with itself. Liberal welfare state tries to eradicate equality. The initial step is to minimize inequality and to see that there is less concentration of wealth among any section of the society. It tries to give and it endeavors to give equality of opportunity to everybody. All these steps only lead to a decent life for the individual and for the society as a whole. It leads to a balanced development of the society, which is the goal, the aim of every society, of every state. Now, liberal welfare state did not be so positive as it is now. There's an old branch of school which is known as negative liberalism, the old classical thought, which was very popular in England from 1750 to 1850, which talked about laissez-faire policy, that is, leave me alone. Me over here stands for the individual. In this negative liberalism, the political thinkers had full faith, immense faith rather, on the rationality of man. They believed that an individual will care for the society as much as he does for himself. They believed that a man is not selfish and he will be selfless while dealing with the society and with the interest of the individual of the society. But this failed because of the Industrial Revolution, in which the rich became richer and the poor became poorer. During the Industrial Revolution, for which England is known to be the herald in all the changes, we have stories where children were exploited. Many children, many workers lost their lives while working in the mines. Corruption was widespread. The workers were not given leave. They were not given their due. If any worker asked for a day off or some hours off, they would be thrown out of the job because unemployment was too much. If one worker walked out of the work, there were 100 more standing in queue to take up a job which did not specify any hours of work, fixed wages. It was work, work, and work, in which all the profits went directly into the pockets of the industrialists. So we have stories, we have poems in English literature which talk about or which paint a very, very sorry picture of all the exploitation which was going on in England. So the same political thinkers who had talked about negative liberalism of laissez-faire policy realized their folly. They saw the profits going into the houses of the rich. They saw the rich exploiting the poor, and the exploitation was of great magnitude. Because of all those and the poets, dramatists bringing forth the woes of the common man and the ill effects of the laissez-faire policy, the ill effects of the industrialization policy, the political thinkers came up with the new theory that is known as positive liberalism or contemporary liberalism, which talks about the state playing a very, very active role in the economy. In the negative liberalism, the state was not allowed to do many, many things. Only some compulsory functions were given to the state, for example, to collect taxes, to maintain the judiciary, to protect the boundaries, to protect the country from internal disorder. These functions are known as the compulsory functions. The optional functions for which the liberal welfare state is very popular today was just not talked about in the negative liberalism because, as I've told you before, the political thinkers had immense faith in the rationality of man. Now, when they saw that man was not as selfless as they had assumed or as they had painted, the next step was to redo their theory and come up with a new theory which did not believe in leaving the individual alone, but having the state control the individual in various aspects. For example, specifying the hours of work, fixing a daily wage so that the worker is not exploited. This concept of protecting the workers, as you've seen or you might have observed, is only increasing day by day. Why? Because the liberal welfare state talks about protecting the weak, the vulnerable, and the disabled. Welfare state is the moral responsibility of every state. It is not to be given as a charity. It is the right of every individual, for individuals pay taxes. Individuals elect a government to power. It is the people who elect a government and then it becomes a legitimate government. That is the hallmark of democracy. Liberal welfare state gives freedom of choice. Freedom of choice to propagate your views. Freedom of choice to profess and propagate your religion. Freedom of choice to speak your opinion, to express your opinion. Freedom of speech and expression. Unlimited rights, unlimited freedom. Freedom of choice in your private life, your personal life, in your professional life, and no discrimination of any kind. In developing countries, implementation of the liberal welfare state becomes a challenge because the reasons are many. high population, low agriculture productivity, industries not up to a level to give employment or generate employment to each and every individual. Coupled with all this, the GDP is low, the gross domestic product is low, which leads to a low gross national income. Besides these, we have people who are ravaged with poverty. Corruption is a norm. There is a competition among people to grab the limited resources are in paucity. Too few and the population is too much. So you have poverty, you have illiteracy, you have malnutrition among children, you have high infant mortality rate, you have women who are backward, you have ignorant people, and you have people who are just not aware about many of their rights. People are not ready to do their duties, and some people are not aware about their duties. Then there are other problems in a developing country like India, where you have people hopelessly divided on the basis of caste, religion, region, and then further into people belonging to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Problems are galore. There are too many. The government has a big task set out for itself, where it has to distribute the limited resources to the maximum people. The same country, the same problems are of many countries. We can count Pakistan, Bangladesh, all these countries which got independence in the last century, where the expectations of the people were just too much, that once out of the colonial rule, we will get all our dues. But when independence came, it came with its own set of problems. So you have the government which wants to perform, which wants to give the maximum to the people, but because of paucity of resources, just does not know how to do it. It has to take, to become a success, it has to take resources from one section of the society and distribute it to the other. The party which has to part away with its resources is just not happy. Once their resources are taken away from them, they go to the court. That leads to increased litigation. The courts are again burdened with a lot of work. It's a vicious cycle where the government wants to deliver whatever it promises before elections and what is written, for example, in India, in the Directive Principles of State Policy. All the economic rights are mentioned in the Directive Principles of State Policy, which promise a welfare state. What is a welfare state? A welfare state is one which does not talk about its profits, which does not care about its profits. Rather, it just talks about the welfare of the state. And even when the economy or the budget runs into a deficit, the government takes from here and there and delivers to the people. So we have directive principles of the state policy which talk about establishing an economic democracy in India. Now, there are people who have criticized the directive principles of state policy. For example, K.T. Shah says, directive principles are like a check payable by the bank at its own convenience. That even if the government does not deliver the directive principles or whatever is written in the directive principles, you cannot go to the court because directive principles are not justiciable like the fundamental rights which are justiciable. But what we have to understand is that though the directive principles are not justiciable, yet they are a very, very strong way to measure the performance of the government, to measure the success of the government, and to see and to question the government or the parties when they come to us in the next elections asking for our votes. So directive principles have the sanction of the public opinion, and if they are written in the constitution, they are sacrosanct, they have to be followed. So directive principles of state policy in the Indian constitution are a guiding step for the Indian government, any party which comes to power, to follow the directive principles and deliver the idea of a liberal welfare state to the people of India. Directive principles of state policy talk about economic equality. They talk about, they say that there should not be concentration of resources with a few. The worker's rights have to be safeguarded. The worker has to be safeguarded. He has to be given a fixed wage. There will not be any inequality of wages among the men and the women. They will be given time to rest and leisure, so on and so forth. So directive principles in India establish or are a guiding light towards the establishment of a liberal welfare state. Though not many things have been implemented, but yes, many articles of the directive principles have been implemented and they are showing great results and the people are happy with it. The directive principles of state policy talk about many welfare schemes. The government floats many schemes to give the directive principle of state policy a facelift or to keep it in sync with the changing times. The midday meal scheme is very popular, where the children are given a free meal, a free nutritious meal every day in the school premises. The government has also started which is supposed to be a great success, and it has gone to check migration from states like Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand to the other states, which is known as the NREGA, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, where even if you sit and work at home, in your own home, and the sarpanch or the village panchayat says yes, then you get your daily wage for that day. So you have the maternity leave, which the present Prime Minister has talked about. The maternity leave has been extended. So there are many schemes which have been floated, and the government is always floating new schemes to make the women, the workers, all the vulnerable people feel secure and happy at work. Now, in the other countries also, we have examples of their trying to be a liberal welfare state. One example is Indonesia, in which it has given health insurance to its 240 million citizens. It has also extended pensions to all the people and insurance in case of an accident. Now, this all has put a great burden on the Indonesian economy, but it has given them a feeling of fulfillment and of being a liberal welfare state, and also taking one giant leap towards the idea of a welfare state. China, our immediate neighbor, our big brother, which is always in the news for some or the other reason, has given health insurance to about 90% of its people living in the rural areas. We have the example of Thailand, which has given or extended the health facility and given them health insurance, universal health care since 2001. We have the example of another country, South Korea, which has extended insurance to all the people and promised pensions also to all the people who retire after a certain age. So these are the countries which are taking baby steps, as we can say, towards the idea of a welfare state. Now we come to a very interesting economy, that is Singapore. Singapore has the best, rather it boasts of the best schools and colleges, also higher educational institutes, but it does not believe in the idea of a liberal welfare state, because it does not believe in substituting hard work by giving false promises or by giving flabby scheme or floating flabby schemes, which tend to be cumbersome in the long process, as many critics say, because it makes people, and the critics say, as we'll do further, the critics say in a welfare state, people become lazy. The hardworking carry the burden of the people who are not ready to work or who are not skilled, etc. So Singapore calls the liberal welfare state a crutch economy, that it is an economy in which a person is given crutches and is given a support and does not want to work hard. So Singapore is a very, very interesting example of not agreeing with the idea of a liberal welfare state, calling it a crutch economy. Now from Asia, let's fly to another continent, that is Latin America. A continent very much like Asia, with lots of problems, but aspirations as the same as the Asian counterparts. They are a little different because they have poverty, illiteracy, all the bondages which come being a colony of a big power. They have all that, same like Asia, but they have the problem of some army general or some leader trying to become a dictator, nullifying the election process, not ready to accept the mandate of the people of the country. So that is one area where they are worse off than countries like India. So they are all toying with the idea of adopting and then implementing the idea of a welfare state. They are successful to some extent in the initial stages. They are surging ahead, albeit with, as I say, baby steps, with the world coming to the rescue. But ultimately, it is the country which has to take up cudgels on its own behalf. So you have the problems of poverty, illiteracy, coupled with all the other problems, political problems, which I have just mentioned, a military coup, a dictator coming to power, etc. So they are known as the emerging welfare states, which are trying hard to give their people what is their due. So we have the example of Uruguay, which was the first country in the region to adopt the idea of a welfare state. It has given social security to the people, education to the people, floated numerous schemes, but at the moment is known as a sick welfare state because of strike by workers for various reasons. Another country which has floated many schemes is Argentina, which has floated since the last count about 60 schemes, welfare schemes meant for its people. How far they are successful in implementing the schemes and the people reaching dividends, we come to know in a decade or so, or maybe 2 decades. The implementation is always done in a hurried phase, but the results come with the expectations of the people, vis-a-vis the expectations of the people. The results pour in slowly, which we'll come to know maybe in another decade or another 5 years. Another country which talks about being a liberal welfare state is Brazil. In Brazil, we have a scheme called the Bolsa Familia, which has uplifted many poor families and given them their daily bread. In Chile, the welfare state and the schemes are floated in such a manner, they are wise enough to keep the international economy in mind. In these countries, one interesting phenomena has been that the very rich have encouraged the implementation of these welfare schemes even after the colonial power has left. Why? Because there was a very, very big gap between the rich and the poor. And if this gap would not be mitigated, the rich could see a revolution in which all their assets would have been snatched away from them. So the good point in these economies is that they wanted the rich, the very rich, not only framed, but they also wished that the welfare scheme should be floated and they should be a success, because as I told you, the gap between the rich and the poor is never healthy for any economy. You only have a French Revolution in the making in such economy. Now from Latin America, we fly to the neighboring continent, that is Africa. Africa, a continent home to many countries, a very unique continent because it was labeled the dark continent by the Western philosophers, by the colonial powers. A continent which had countries very diverse and very similar to each other, corruption, racial discrimination, people divided on the basis of tribes, lot of natural resources waiting to be tapped up, but being tapped up by the colonial power, and after them by the rich who made profits by selling off the land of the tribe. In Africa, corruption is a curse, but a curse which permeates into every aspect of social, economic, and political life. It has become larger than life, where every section of the society, every individual wants to hoard wealth. The other factor is there is too much dependence on foreign aid. Rather, there are too many foreign players which are interested in looting Africa because the continent boasts of rich resources, rich natural resources, which are to be tapped and huge profits are to be made from them. So, it's a vicious cycle. The people of Africa, the policymakers have got used to the idea of foreign aid coming in. It might be to fight a disease, to fight malnutrition. There are various ways in which the money is sent into Africa. There are many excuses. You have people foreigners working in Africa, giving health facilities to the people, spreading education and converting people into Christianity. It all happens in the name of aid. So there are people of Africa who are resisting these changes, who are into tribes and do not want to be converted. But if they do not want to be converted, they still want to receive the health and educational facilities. Now, the extending the health and educational facilities come with a cost, and that is converting to Christianity. So, caught in this vicious cycle, the policymakers are corrupt. They do not know how to, or they lack the will to make an independent policy, denying foreign aid and trying to develop themselves. For they feel they will not be able to do without the foreign aid. They feel crippled without the foreign aid. The big masters like the US, UK, France, all these big players are very happy with this crippled economy, which they boast of uplifting with all the foreign aid. Besides this, the state and the market, as a consequence or as a cause, see, you have state and market are weak because there is foreign aid or too much of foreign interference. The other thing can be that because there is foreign aid and foreign interference, the state and market are very weak. The demand and supply forces are not able to function as effectively as they should be because the markets are being controlled by people outside Africa's boundaries, and that control is shown in the functioning of the state. Which leads us to our next problem, that is political instability. Because the people do not see their government working independently or taking too many grants or taking orders from across the boundaries. There are some people who are always against the government for taking help, but when they come to power themselves, they do this exactly the same because there is no other option. So this leads to political instability, too many elections, too much criticism, and very, very less work done on ground. So another factor for Africa not being able to implement the idea of a liberal welfare state is political instability with elections or proxy elections or no elections taking place or frequent elections taking place. And as with all the developing economies, the resources are with a few people, that is the elite of the society, who do not want to part away with the wealth. We also have the problem of a fragmented society in Africa, where the people are divided on the basis of tribes, and each tribe citing its own culture, citing its own traditions, citing its own area as a private property which is being taken over by the state, and the states don't like, and the tribes don't like it. But the state says it has to be done because boundaries have to be clearly demarcated. So Africa needs the idea of a liberal welfare state very, very badly, but then there are too many impediments, there are too many obstacles in the way of implementation of the idea of a liberal welfare state. You had poverty, illiteracy, Africa was ravaged by diseases. So the idea of a welfare state was and is much needed in a continent which was labeled as, in a very derogatory phrase rather, as the dark continent. So we are going to talk about Africa as a continent and how the countries tried to become or tried to implement the very interesting, useful idea of a liberal welfare state. Critics say that there's a holy trinity in Africa, and the 3 points of the holy trinity are poverty, ignorance, and disease. These 3 are the big banes, curse of the African economy. Besides this, there is lack of industry set up in Africa and lack of technical expertise, for which they have to depend upon foreign labor or on foreign expert advice. Yet the effort of the African countries, the policymakers, continue, and we have them taking small but crucial steps towards the idea of a welfare state. The critics say welfare state is a very, very bad idea because it makes the people lazy. It makes the people dependent. A majority of the population which is not willing to work hard, which does not believe in innovation, is dependent on a set of people, a small set of people who are working very, very hard. They believe that the forces of demand and supply in the market should be allowed to play freely, and in the process, the people will have to fend for themselves, work hard, and prove themselves, and the state can pitch in wherever there is paucity or wherever there is a need felt for a little bit of state intervention. But whatever we say, the concept of welfare state has emerged in the last century. The concept of liberal welfare state is here to stay. We cannot run away from it. From the days when we talked about negative liberalism and confining the state to a certain limit, we have now let the state enter our homes, enter our bedrooms, where we have the government making laws to stop abuse of women within the 4 walls of her house, the domestic violence home. Just 2 days back, the High Court passed a judgment, the Punjab and Haryana High Court passed a judgment that a son does not take over his parents' property. He is to be at their mercy. He has to behave with them. In the past, the government in India passed a law that daughters of the family are equal participants in the share of the property. So, liberal welfare state is a very, very vast concept which takes care of the individual in the social, economic, and political spheres. So, we have the liberal welfare state talking about equality, talking about freedom, and whatever the critics may say, the role of the state cannot be undermined. So we have to encourage the state to fulfill the idea of a liberal welfare state. The liberal welfare state, to conclude, is a vibrant state where there is a constant communication, feedback between the state and the people. The people demand, the state delivers. So it's a very dynamic concept of a liberal welfare state, where the state has to deliver, where the state has to be equal to the various parameters which the people, the constitution, the political system has set for it. Within that fixed tenure, the state has to prove itself that it has taken the idea of a liberal welfare state 1, 2, 3, 4 steps ahead from where the last government left it. Liberal welfare state is the need of the hour, irrespective of what the critics say. It helps in the task of nation building. Why? Because the state, when it is following the idea of a liberal welfare state, believes in taking all the people along, so that there is no frustration, there is no dissatisfaction, which are the seeds of a revolution in a society. So people are united when there is an emergency, when there is a crisis. Why? Because name a section which says what has the state done for us, and the state comes up with points that 1, 2, 3, this is what we have done for you. So the idea of a liberal welfare state in the developing countries is still in the embryonic stage, but it is all set to grow. And soon we will have a healthy baby delivered to us by the state, in which we will have freedom of choice, equality, less concentration of wealth, and happy smiling faces. Thank you.